The night was calm and quiet on County Road 17, a stretch of asphalt that wound its way through the countryside like a ribbon cutting through fields and forests. Officer Ryan Carter had been patrolling this road for years, but tonight felt different. The stillness in the air seemed heavier than usual, as if something unseen was pressing down on the world around him. His headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating patches of tall grass swaying gently in the breeze and the occasional mailbox standing lonely at the edge of a driveway. Ryan's thoughts drifted lazily as he drove, his mind wandering over mundane things, how much coffee he'd drunk that day, whether or not he needed to pick up milk from the store before heading home, and how long it would take before retirement finally came knocking. But all of those thoughts vanished in an instant when a figure burst out of the woods ahead of him. It happened so quickly that Ryan almost didn't react in time. One moment the road was empty. The next, a boy no older than 10 darted into the beam of his headlights. He was barefoot, his clothes torn and dirty, streaks of mud covering every inch of exposed skin. His hair stuck out wildly, as though he'd been running for hours without stopping. Ryan slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the pavement as the car skidded to a halt just inches away from the child. For a second, neither of them moved. Ryan sat frozen behind the wheel, staring at the boy, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Then the boy stepped forward, waving his arms frantically. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice hoarse and desperate. "Please stop!" Ryan rolled down his window cautiously. He wasn't sure what to expect. A prank, maybe? Or some kind of troublemaker looking for attention? Kids sometimes wandered too, far into the woods and got themselves lost, but they usually weren't this frantic. This boy looked terrified, his wide eyes darting back toward the trees as if something monstrous might emerge at any moment. "What's going on?" Ryan asked, leaning out slightly so he could see the boy better. "Are you okay?" The boy didn't answer right away. Instead, he clutched at the doorframe of the patrol car, his small hands gripping the metal tightly. His breathing was ragged, each breath coming in shallow gasps. It took him a few moments to steady himself enough to speak. When he did, his words sent a chill crawling up Ryan's spine. "They're after me," the boy whispered, his voice trembling. "You have to help me." Ryan frowned, glancing past the boy toward the dark forest. The woods loomed ominously in the distance, their shadows thick and impenetrable under the dim glow of the moonlight. There was nothing unusual about the sight. It was just trees, branches swaying softly in the wind. But something about the scene made Ryan uneasy. Maybe it was the way the boy kept looking over his shoulder, as if expecting something to leap out at him. Or maybe it was the sheer panic etched into the child's face, raw and unfiltered. "Who's after you?" Ryan asked, his tone firm but gentle. "Did someone hurt you?" The boy shook his head violently, tears welling up in his eyes. No one hurt me. Not yet, but they will. They're close, I can feel them." Ryan hesitated, unsure of what to do next. He reached for his flashlight on the passenger seat, flicking it on to get a better look at the boy. In the bright beam of light, he noticed more details. The scratches on the boy's arms, the dirt caked under his fingernails, the way his lips quivered as he tried to hold back sobs. Whoever or whatever this kid was running from, it had clearly left its mark on him. "My name's Ryan," the officer said, keeping his voice steady. "I'm here to help. What's your name?" The boy blinked rapidly, as if trying to process the question. "Ethan," he replied after a pause. "My name's Ethan." "Well, Ethan, tell me what happened. Why are you out here alone?" Ethan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly beneath his thin neck. For a moment, Ryan thought the boy might refuse to talk, but then he began speaking in a rush, the words tumbling out of him like water breaking through a dam. "I was with my family," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "We went camping. Just us, me, Mom, Dad, and my little sister. We were supposed to stay for 3 days, but—" He trailed off, his gaze dropping to the ground. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost too soft to hear. "Something came for us." Ryan leaned closer, his brow furrowing. "Something. What do you mean, Ethan? Was it people, animals?" Ethan shook his head again, his expression haunted. "Not people, not animals either. I don't know what they are. They don't look normal. He shuddered, wrapping his arms around himself as though trying to ward off a chill. They came at night. We heard noises first, scraping sounds like metal dragging across rock, and voices. So many voices whispering. At first we thought it was the wind, but it wasn't. It couldn't be. Ryan listened intently, his instincts telling him that this wasn't just a frightened child spinning tales. There was something genuine in Ethan's fear, something primal that resonated deep within Ryan's gut. Still, he needed more information before jumping to conclusions. What happened next? Ryan prompted, his grip tightening slightly on the steering wheel. Ethan hesitated, his lower lip trembling. They came into our camp, he said finally. I don't know how. 1 minute, everything was fine. The next, the tent was ripped open and there were things outside. My dad told me to run. He said he and Mom would hold them off while I got away. That's the last thing he said to me. Tears spilled down Ethan's cheeks now, leaving streaks in the dirt on his face. Ryan felt a pang of sympathy for the boy, but he pushed it aside for the moment. He needed to focus, to understand exactly what Ethan was describing. And these things, Ryan said carefully. What did they look like? Ethan shook his head, squeezing his eyes shut as though trying to block out the memory. I don't want to think about it, he murmured. But I saw them, just for a second. They didn't have faces, no eyes, no mouths, nothing, just shadows, moving shadows. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Ryan stared at Ethan, searching for any sign that the boy might be lying or exaggerating. But all he saw was terror, pure, unadulterated terror. Whatever Ethan had seen, it had scarred him deeply. Ryan exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. This was unlike anything he'd dealt with before. Most calls involved petty crimes or domestic disputes, the kinds of problems that could be solved with logic and common sense. This was something else entirely. All right, Ethan, Ryan said finally, his voice firm but reassuring. Let's get you somewhere safe. You can tell me more once we're out of here. Ethan nodded weakly, climbing into the passenger seat when Ryan gestured for him to do so. As the car pulled away from the side of the road, Ethan twisted around, in his seat, staring back at the woods with wide, fearful eyes. They're still out there, he whispered, almost to himself. And they'll come for me again. Ryan glanced at the boy, then at the rearview mirror, where the forest disappeared, into the darkness behind them. Despite himself, he couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan might be right. As the patrol car rolled down County Road 17, Ethan sat stiffly in the passenger seat, his small hands gripping the edge of the seat like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. His eyes darted constantly between the road ahead and the rearview mirror, as if he expected something to burst out of the darkness behind them at any moment. Ryan tried to keep his focus on driving, but he could feel the weight of Ethan's fear pressing down on the car like a storm cloud. The boy's words echoed in his mind. They don't have faces. It didn't make sense, but Ryan couldn't ignore the dread creeping into his chest. You're safe now, Ryan said finally, breaking the silence that had settled over them. His voice was calm, though he wasn't sure how much he believed his own words. Whatever happened back there, you're with me now. I won't let anything happen to you. Ethan didn't respond right away. He kept staring out the window, his face pale under the dim glow of the dashboard lights. When he did speak, his voice was barely above a whisper. You don't understand. They're not like anything you've ever seen. You can't fight them. No one can. Ryan glanced at the boy, noting the way his hands trembled. He wanted to reassure Ethan, to tell him that everything would be okay, but something about the boy's tone stopped him. There was no room for doubt in Ethan's voice. He truly believed what he was saying. Whatever he had encountered in the woods, it had shattered his sense of safety, leaving him raw and fragile. Tell me more, Ryan said gently. What were they doing when you saw them? Did they say anything? Ethan hesitated, his gaze dropping to his lap. For a moment, Ryan thought he might refuse to answer, but then the boy took a shaky breath and began speaking again. At first, we didn't see them. We just heard the sounds, the scraping, the whispers. My dad thought it was animals messing, With our stuff, so he went outside to check. That's when it started. Started? Ryan prompted, keeping his eyes on the road but listening intently. Ethan nodded, his fingers twisting together nervously. The whispers got louder, not like voices talking normally, but overlapping like hundreds of people all speaking at once. And the shadows, they moved wrong, like they weren't attached to anything. Then we saw them. Saw who? Ryan asked, though he already knew the answer. The things, Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. They came out of the trees. At first we thought they were just shadows, but they weren't. They had shapes like people, but not. No faces, no features, just emptiness, blackness. They surrounded our tent, and they didn't move like animals or people. They glided like smoke. Ryan swallowed hard, trying to process what Ethan was describing. It sounded impossible, like something out of a nightmare, but the boy's conviction made it impossible to dismiss. He glanced at Ethan again, noticing the way the boy's shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself smaller, less noticeable. What happened after that? Ryan asked softly. Ethan shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes again. I don't know exactly. My dad yelled for me to run. He pushed me toward the woods and told me to keep going, no matter what. I looked back once and I saw him and Mom standing in front of the tent holding sticks or rocks or something. I don't think it mattered. Those things, they didn't care. Ryan felt a lump rise in his throat. He couldn't imagine what it must have been like for Ethan to watch his parents sacrifice themselves while he fled into the unknown. The boy had probably been running for hours, terrified and alone, with no idea where to go or who to trust. And yet here he was, sitting in Ryan's car, still alive. You did good, Ethan, Ryan said, his voice thick with emotion. You followed your dad's instructions. That took courage. Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he stared out the window, his expression distant as if he were replaying the events in his mind. Ryan decided not to push him further. The boy had already shared more than most adults could handle. It was clear he needed time to process everything. The patrol car continued down the road, the hum of the engine filling the silence between them. Ryan's thoughts drifted back to the forest. He'd driven past those woods countless times, never giving them a second thought. But now, they seemed darker, more ominous, as if hiding secrets too terrible to comprehend. He couldn't shake the image of faceless figures gliding through the trees, their movements unnatural and sinister. We need to figure out what's going on, Ryan said after a while, partly to himself and partly to Ethan. If there's any chance your parents are still out there? No! Ethan interrupted sharply, his voice rising in panic. You can't go back there. You don't know what they're capable of. Ryan held up a hand to calm the boy. I'm not saying I'll dive in without thinking, but if there's even a small chance your family's still alive, I have to try. It's my job. Ethan shook his head violently, tears streaming down his face. You don't get it. They're not alive anymore. They're gone. If you go back, they'll get you too. Ryan sighed, torn between his duty as an officer and his growing unease. On one hand, Ethan's warnings were vague and hard to verify. On the other hand, the boy's terror was real, and Ryan couldn't ignore it. Whatever was lurking in those woods, it had clearly left a lasting impression on Ethan, and possibly on others as well. I'll be careful, Ryan promised. But I need to see this place for myself. Maybe there's evidence, clues that can help us understand what happened. Ethan buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Ryan reached over and placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. Hey, listen to me. I'm not going to leave you alone. We'll stick together, okay? You're safe with me. Ethan didn't reply, but after a few moments, he nodded weakly. Ryan turned his attention back to the road, his mind racing. He needed to decide what to do next. Driving straight to the station would mean putting Ethan in the hands of Child Protective Services, which might be the safest option for the boy. But Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that he owed it to Ethan and to his missing family to investigate further. After a few more minutes of driving, Ryan pulled the car onto the shoulder and turned off the engine. The sudden quiet was almost deafening, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. He turned to Ethan, his expression serious but kind. "Ethan, I need you to tell me exactly where your campsite was. Can you do that?" Ethan hesitated, his lower lip trembling. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Because I want to help," Ryan replied. "If there's anything left at the campsite, a clue, a sign, it could tell us what happened to your family. But I need you to guide me there." Ethan stared at Ryan for a long moment, his wide eyes searching the officer's face for reassurance. Finally, he nodded reluctantly. "Okay," he whispered. "But you have to promise me something." "What's that?" "If it gets bad, if you see them, you run. Don't try to fight, just run." Ryan nodded solemnly. "I promise." With that, Ryan restarted the car and turned it around, heading back toward the woods. As they approached the edge of the forest, the road grew narrower, the trees closing in on either side like sentinels guarding their domain. Ryan slowed the car, scanning the area for any sign of the trail Ethan had described. The boy pointed suddenly, his finger trembling as he indicated a narrow dirt path leading into the trees. "There," Ethan said, his voice tight with anxiety. "That's where we parked." Ryan parked the car and grabbed his flashlight from the glove compartment. He also retrieved his radio, ensuring it was fully charged in case he needed to call for backup. As he stepped out of the car, he noticed how oppressive the atmosphere had become. The air felt heavier here, damp and cold despite the mild evening. Even the sounds of nature seemed muted, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Ethan climbed out of the car hesitantly, staying close to Ryan's side. His small frame practically vibrated with tension, his eyes darting nervously in every direction. Ryan knelt down to meet the boy's gaze, offering a reassuring smile. "We'll take it slow," he said. "Just stay close to me, all right?" Ethan nodded, clutching Ryan's sleeve tightly as they began walking down the path. The beam of the flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing twisted roots and fallen branches littering the ground. The deeper they ventured into the woods, the more Ryan felt a sense of unease settle over him. It wasn't just the eerie silence or the gnarled shapes of the trees, it was something else, something he couldn't quite put into words. "This is it," Ethan whispered suddenly, stopping in his tracks. "This is where we set up camp." Ryan swept the flashlight around the area, illuminating a small clearing. The remnants of a fire pit lay in the center, surrounded by scattered belongings, torn fabric, a broken lantern, a shoe half buried. In the dirt, everything was coated in a fine layer of grime, as if abandoned for days rather than hours. But there was no sign of life, no movement, no sound. Ryan crouched down to examine the scene more closely, his flashlight casting long shadows across the ground. As he did, Ethan tugged urgently on his sleeve. "Look," the boy said, pointing toward one of the nearby trees. Ryan followed Ethan's gaze and froze. Carved into the bark of the tree was a symbol, a jagged, angular design that seemed to pulse, faintly with an otherworldly green light. It was unlike anything Ryan had ever seen, both mesmerizing and unsettling. "What is that?" Ryan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan shook his head, his grip on Ryan's sleeve tightening. "I don't know, but I saw it before back at the campsite. It was glowing." The patrol car sped down the narrow dirt path, its tires kicking up clouds of dust as Ryan pushed the accelerator to the floor. The headlights cut through the darkness like twin beams of salvation, but they couldn't fully erase the oppressive weight of the forest surrounding them. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustling leaf carried the threat of movement. Ryan's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. Beside him, Ethan sat hunched forward, his small body pressed against the door as if trying to put as much distance between himself and the woods as possible. Neither of them spoke. There was no need for words. The fear in the air was palpable, thick enough to choke on. Ryan kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something, anything emerging from the trees behind them. But the road remained empty, save for the occasional flicker of branches swaying in the wind. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered, gnawing at the edges of Ryan's mind like a persistent itch he couldn't scratch. When they finally reached County Road 17, Ryan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The open expanse of asphalt felt like a lifeline, a fragile barrier separating them from whatever horrors lurked within the woods. He slowed the car slightly, allowing himself a moment to collect his thoughts. His heart was still racing, adrenaline coursing through his veins, but he forced himself to focus. Whatever had happened back there, and whatever those things were, they weren't going to disappear just because he drove away. "Are you okay?" Ryan asked, glancing at Ethan. The boy didn't respond immediately, his gaze fixed on the window, as the dark shapes of the trees receded into the distance. Finally, he nodded weakly, though the motion lacked conviction. "I don't think we're safe," Ethan murmured after a long pause. His voice was soft, almost too quiet to hear over the hum of the engine. "They know we were there. They'll follow us." Ryan frowned, torn between reassurance and realism. He wanted to tell Ethan that everything would be fine, that they were far enough away now to breathe easy. But the memory of the shifting shadows, the unnatural smoke-like forms coalescing in the clearing, was burned into his mind. Those things hadn't attacked, not directly. They had simply watched, and that made them even more terrifying. "We'll figure this out," Ryan said instead, his tone firm but gentle. "I promise." Ethan didn't reply. He slumped back. Against the seat, his eyes glazed with exhaustion. It was clear the boy hadn't slept in hours, maybe days. The combination of fear, grief, and physical strain had taken its toll, leaving him drained. Ryan glanced at him again, feeling a pang of sympathy. No child should have to endure what Ethan had gone through. Whatever happened next, Ryan knew he had to protect the boy, even if it meant putting himself in harm's way. The drive back to Mao town felt longer than usual, though Ryan wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the silence, heavy and unbroken except for the occasional crackle of the police radio. Or maybe it was the nagging sense that they weren't truly alone, that some unseen force was trailing them, waiting for the right moment to strike. Either way, Ryan kept one hand near his holstered gun, ready for anything. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, the first hints of dawn were beginning to creep over the horizon. The sky shifted from black to deep indigo, streaks of pale orange bleeding into the clouds. Ryan found himself oddly comforted by the sight. Daylight always brought a sense of normalcy, a reminder that the world wasn't entirely consumed by darkness. Even so, he couldn't shake the image of those glowing symbols carved into the tree bark, pulsating with an eerie green light. What did they mean? Who or what had put them there? As they entered the main part of town, Ryan decided to head straight for the station. He needed to document everything Ethan had told him, to make sure there was an official record in case things escalated further. He also needed to call for backup. Whatever was happening, it was clear he couldn't handle it alone. But when he pulled into the parking lot and turned off the engine, Ethan suddenly tensed. "What are we doing here?" the boy asked, his voice rising with panic. "We can't stay here, they'll find us." Ryan unbuckled his seatbelt and turned to face Ethan, his expression calm but resolute. "Listen to me, Ethan. I'm not leaving you unprotected. This is the safest place for now. We'll lock the doors and I'll keep my radio on. If anything happens, if anyone tries to get in, you'll be the first to know." Ethan shook his head violently, tears welling up in his eyes again. "You don't understand. They aren't people. They don't knock on doors or break windows. They just appear, out of nowhere." Ryan hesitated, his resolve wavering. He wanted to believe Ethan was exaggerating, that the trauma of losing his family had warped his perception of reality, but the evidence suggested otherwise. The symbols, the shadows, the whispers, all of it pointed to something beyond human comprehension, and yet Ryan couldn't afford to act purely on instinct. He needed proof, something tangible he could show to others without sounding like he'd lost his mind. "All right," Ryan said finally, leaning back in his seat. "If you don't want to go inside, we don't have to. But we need to come up with a plan. You've seen these things before. Do you know where they came from?" Was there any warning before they showed up? Ethan stared at him, his lower lip trembling. For a moment, Ryan thought the boy might refuse to answer. Then, slowly, Ethan began to speak. "They don't come from anywhere," he whispered. "At least not from around here. My dad said he heard stories about them once, a long time ago. People used to talk about them in hushed voices, like saying their name would make them real. He called them Watchers." "Watchers?" Ryan repeated, his brow furrowing. "What does that mean?" Ethan shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. All I know is that they watch. And when they're done watching, they take you." Ryan felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Take you where?" Ethan shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I don't know. Nobody ever comes back." The finality in the boy's voice hit Ryan like a punch to the gut. He wanted to argue, to insist that there had to be survivors, answers, some kind of explanation. But Ethan's certainty left no room for doubt. These creatures, these watchers, were unlike anything Ryan had encountered in his years as an officer. They weren't bound by logic or reason. They didn't play by the rules of the natural world. And if they were truly as powerful as Ethan claimed, then running wasn't going to solve anything. "We need to warn people," Ryan said after a moment, his voice low and urgent. "If these things are real, and I'm starting to believe they are, we can't just sit back and wait for them to attack. We need to prepare." "How?" Ethan asked bitterly. "No one will believe us. They'll think we're crazy." Ryan clenched his jaw, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Ethan was right. Convincing others wouldn't be easy. Without concrete evidence, most people would dismiss their claims as paranoia or delusion. But Ryan couldn't give up. Not yet. "Then we'll find proof," he said firmly. "Something undeniable. Something that will make them listen." Ethan looked at him skeptically, his tear-streaked face unreadable. "And how do we do that?" Ryan hesitated, his mind racing. He thought back to the clearing, to the symbols glowing faintly on the trees. If he could photograph them, analyze them, maybe even trace their origin, it might be enough to convince others. But returning to the woods was dangerous, not just for him but for Ethan as well. Taking the boy back there would be reckless, bordering on cruel. Yet leaving him behind wasn't an option either. Ethan was the only witness, the only link to understanding what was happening. "I'll go back," Ryan said finally, his decision made. "Alone." "No," Ethan shouted, grabbing Ryan's arm. "You can't. You saw what they can do. If you go back, you'll die." Ryan placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder, meeting the boy's wide, frightened eyes. "I won't. Be reckless. I'll stay alert, keep my distance, and I'll bring reinforcements this time. But I need to see those symbols again. I need to understand what they mean." Ethan shook his head, his grip tightening. "It's not worth it. Nothing is worth going back there." Ryan sighed, his heart aching for the boy. "I know you're scared, Ethan. I am too. But if there's even a chance we can stop this, if we can protect other people from ending up like your family, then I have to try. Do you understand?" Ethan didn't respond right away. He stared at Ryan, his expression a mixture of fear and desperation. Finally, he nodded reluctantly, though, his eyes brimmed with fresh tears. "Just be careful," he whispered. "Please." Ryan gave him a small, sad smile. "I will, I promise." With that, Ryan started the car again and drove toward the station. He called ahead to arrange for Child Protective Services to meet them, knowing Ethan needed proper care and supervision while he planned his return to the woods. As they waited in the parking lot, Ryan kept glancing at the boy, his guilt mounting with each passing second. Leaving Ethan behind felt wrong, almost cowardly. But he reminded himself that it was necessary. Protecting the boy meant keeping him as far away from danger as possible. When the social worker arrived, a kind-faced woman named Lisa, Ryan explained the situation as best he could without revealing too much. He emphasized Ethan's trauma and the need for immediate support, careful to avoid mentioning the watchers or the glowing symbols. Lisa nodded sympathetically, her demeanor professional yet warm as she led Ethan away. As Ryan watched the boy climb into Lisa's car, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor as Ryan and his two fellow officers, Officer Lucas and Officer Kim, made their way down the narrow dirt path leading into the woods. The air was cooler here, damp and heavy with the scent of moss and decaying leaves. Ryan carried a camera slung over his shoulder, its weight a constant reminder of why they were there. Beside him, Lucas held a flashlight while Kim clutched a notepad, ready to document anything unusual they might find. Despite the daylight, the forest felt darker than it should have, as if the trees themselves were conspiring to block out the light. Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, even though there was no visible sign of movement around them. Every step forward felt heavier than the last, like the ground beneath their feet resisted their presence. He glanced at Lucas and Kim, both of whom seemed uneasy but determined. They trusted Ryan to lead them safely through whatever lay ahead, and he didn't want to let them down. "This is it," Ryan said finally, stopping at the edge of the clearing where he and Ethan had been just hours earlier. The scene looked much the same. Torn fabric scattered across the ground, remnants of a fire pit and personal belongings half buried in the dirt. But something felt different this time. The symbols on the trees glowed faintly, pulsating with an eerie green light. That wasn't there before. It was subtle, almost imperceptible unless you stared directly at them. But Ryan noticed immediately. "Look at that," he murmured, pointing his flashlight toward one of the symbols carved into the bark. "Do you see it?" Lucas squinted, stepping closer to examine the mark. "What is that? Some kind of graffiti?" "It's not graffiti," Ryan replied, his voice low. "Ethan said these symbols appeared when those things showed up." Kim frowned, jotting something down in her notebook. "Things? What exactly are we talking about here, Ryan? You mentioned something strange in your radio call, but you never gave us details." Ryan hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. He knew how far-fetched the truth sounded, even to himself, but hiding the facts wouldn't help anyone. According to Ethan, there are creatures in these woods. Shadow-like figures without faces. They move unnaturally like smoke or liquid, and wherever they go, these symbols appear. Lucas raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Shadow figures, no faces? That sounds like something out of a horror movie." "I know it sounds crazy," Ryan admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But I saw them too, or at least part of them. Last night when I brought Ethan back here, the shadows started moving, forming shapes. I don't know what they are, but they're real. Trust me." Kim exchanged a glance with Lucas, then nodded slowly. "All right. Let's assume you're right. What do we do next?" Ryan gestured toward the symbols. "We document everything. Take pictures, make notes, collect samples if we can. If these marks are connected to those things, maybe someone can figure out what they mean." Lucas sighed, but didn't argue. Instead, he pulled out his own camera and began snapping photos of the clearing. Kim crouched near the base of one of the trees, carefully sketching the symbol onto her notepad. Ryan moved closer to another tree, shining his flashlight on the glowing mark etched into the bark. Up close, the design was even stranger than he'd first thought. Jagged lines intersected at odd angles, forming patterns that seemed almost deliberate yet completely alien. He reached out cautiously, intending to trace the outline with his finger, but stopped short when a sudden noise echoed through the clearing. "What was that?" Kim asked sharply, standing up and looking around. Ryan froze, his heart pounding. At first, he thought it might have been an animal, a bird taking flight or a squirrel scurrying through the underbrush. But the sound hadn't been natural. It was more like a scraping noise, metallic and sharp, followed by a faint whisper. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. "Stay alert," Ryan whispered, gripping his flashlight tightly. "Something's nearby." The three officers formed a loose circle, their eyes scanning the trees for any sign of movement. For several tense moments, nothing happened. The forest remained eerily silent, the usual sounds of wildlife conspicuously absent. Then, without warning, The symbols on the trees flared brightly, bathing the clearing in an unnatural green glow. "Get back!" Ryan shouted, instinctively stepping away from the nearest tree. As he did, the shadows between the trunks began to shift, twisting and writhing like living smoke. Shapes emerged from the darkness, tall, featureless forms that glided silently toward them. "Oh my God," Kim breathed, her voice trembling. "What are those?" Ryan didn't answer. His mind raced, trying to process what he was seeing. These weren't ordinary shadows. They pulsed with energy, their edges flickering like flames. Each figure was humanoid in shape but lacked any defining features. No eyes, no mouths, no hands. Just smooth, black surfaces that reflected no light. "They're here," Ryan muttered, his voice barely audible. Just like Ethan said, Lucas raised his flashlight, shining the beam directly at one of the figures. To everyone's shock, the light passed right through it as if the creature wasn't solid. "What the hell?" he exclaimed, backing away quickly. "Don't turn your backs on them," Ryan ordered, his training kicking in despite the surreal situation. "Whatever you do, don't run." The figures continued to advance, their movements fluid and deliberate. They didn't attack or make any aggressive gestures. They simply surrounded the group, cutting off any potential escape routes. Whispers filled the air, overlapping voices speaking in languages none of them could understand. The sound was deafening, pressing down on them like a physical force. Kim clutched her notepad tightly, her face pale with fear. What do we do now? Ryan's mind raced. He remembered Ethan's warning. Don't touch the symbols. Don't provoke them. But they were already here, and running wouldn't solve anything. Stay calm, he said, his voice steady despite the terror clawing at his chest. They haven't done anything yet. Maybe they're just watching. Watching for what? Lucas demanded, his voice rising in panic. For us to drop dead? Before Ryan could respond, one of the figures extended a limb, not quite an arm, more like a tendril of shadow, and pointed directly at him. The gesture wasn't hostile, but it sent waves of dread coursing through him all the same. It was as if the creature was singling him out, marking him for something. Why is it looking at you? Kim whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Ryan shook his head, unable to answer. He wanted to believe this was some kind of misunderstanding, that the Watchers weren't inherently dangerous, but deep down he knew better. Whatever these things were, they weren't here to help. They were here to observe, and perhaps take. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the figures dissolved into the ground, vanishing without a trace. The whispers faded, leaving behind an oppressive silence. The symbols on the trees dimmed, their glow fading until they were nothing more than ordinary carvings once again. For a moment, no one moved. Ryan, Lucas, and Kim stood frozen, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Finally, Lucas broke the silence. What the hell was that? I don't know, Ryan admitted, lowering his flashlight. His hands were shaking, but he forced himself to stay composed. But we need to get out of here now. The drive back to town was tense and quiet. None of them spoke about what they had seen, though the memory of those featureless figures loomed large in their minds. When they arrived at the station, Ryan immediately called for a meeting with the sheriff. He needed to report everything, the symbols, the Watchers, Ethan's account, in detail. Whatever was happening in those woods, it was bigger than any of them realized. As he sat in his office later that evening, staring at the photographs he had taken, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that they were only scratching the surface. Those symbols meant something. The Watchers had a purpose, and if Ryan didn't figure it out soon, more people would vanish without a trace, including him. The station was unusually quiet that evening, the kind of silence that pressed against your ears and made you hyper-aware of every tiny sound. Ryan sat alone in his office, the photographs spread out across his desk like puzzle pieces waiting to be assembled. Each image showed a symbol carved into the bark of a tree, glowing faintly with an unnatural green light. They were jagged and angular, their shapes deliberately alien, as if designed to unsettle anyone who looked at them for too long. Ryan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as he tried to make sense of it all. He had already briefed the sheriff, laying out everything he knew, the boy's story, the glowing symbols, the shadowy figures that seemed to defy logic. The sheriff had listened intently, nodding occasionally, but saying little. When Ryan finished, the older man sighed deeply, his expression unreadable. "This is complicated," the sheriff said finally, choosing his words carefully. "I trust you, Ryan. I know you wouldn't make something like this up. But we're dealing with something outside our usual scope. This isn't burglary or drunk driving, if these things are real, and I'm not saying they aren't. We need more than just eyewitness accounts. We need proof." Ryan nodded, though frustration simmered beneath the surface. Proof was exactly what he was trying to find. But how do you prove the existence of something that shouldn't exist? The symbols were strange, yes, but without context they were just carvings on trees. And the Watchers, those faceless, shadowy figures, they had vanished as quickly as they appeared, leaving behind no trace of their presence beyond the memories of those who saw them. As the sheriff left the room, Ryan returned to the photographs, studying each one closely. He traced the patterns with his finger, searching for any clue that might reveal their meaning. Were they warnings, markers, or something else entirely? Whatever they were, they clearly held significance to the Watchers. Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that understanding the symbols was the key to unraveling the mystery. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Officer Kim poked her head inside, her expression hesitant. "You got a minute?" Ryan gestured for her to come in. "What's up?" Kim closed the door behind her and took a seat across from him. She glanced at the photos on the desk, then back at Ryan. "I've been thinking about what happened out there. About those things. Do you think Ethan's family is still alive?" The question caught Ryan off guard. He hadn't allowed himself to dwell on the fate of Ethan's parents and sister, not because he didn't care, but because the possibilities were too grim to consider. If the Watchers had taken them, what did that mean? Where had they gone? And why? "I don't know," Ryan admitted after a moment. "Ethan said nobody comes back once they're taken, but we can't assume the worst until we have evidence." Kim nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to her lap. "It's just, I keep picturing my own family, my kids. What if something like this happened to them? How would I even begin to explain it?" Ryan reached across the desk, placing a reassuring hand on hers. "We'll figure this out, Kim. Whatever these things are, we'll stop them. I won't let anyone else get hurt." Kim managed a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I hope you're right." Later that night, Ryan drove home, his mind still racing with unanswered questions. The streets of the small town were deserted, the houses dark except for the occasional porch light. It was peaceful, almost eerily so, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Ryan parked in front of his modest house and stepped out of the car, glancing around instinctively. Everything seemed normal, but the memory of the Watchers lingered in the back of his mind, tainting the calm with unease. Inside, the house was quiet. Ryan flicked on the lights and dropped his keys onto the counter, then poured himself a glass of water. As he stood in the kitchen, sipping slowly, his eyes fell on the wall above the sink. For a second he thought he saw something, a faint mark, barely visible in the dim light. He blinked, dismissing it as a trick of the shadows. But when he looked again, the mark was still there. Heart pounding, Ryan grabbed a flashlight and shone it directly at the wall. His stomach dropped. Carved into the plaster was a symbol, an exact replica of the ones he had photographed in the woods. It wasn't glowing, but it was unmistakable. Someone or something had been here. Ryan's hands trembled as he examined the mark more closely. The edges were rough, as if it had been etched hastily with a sharp object. He ran his fingers over it, half expecting it to pulse with the same green light as the ones in the forest. But it remained inert, cold to the touch. A chill crept up his spine as he realized what this meant. The Watchers weren't confined to the woods. They could follow. They could track. And now, somehow, they had found him. He backed away from the wall, his mind racing. Should he call the station? The sheriff? What would he even say? That some unseen force had marked his home? That he was being hunted by creatures no one else believed existed? No matter who he called, they wouldn't understand. Not fully. Not. Yet instead, Ryan grabbed a hammer and chisel from the garage and began working to remove the section of wall where the symbol had been carved. Sweat dripped down his forehead as he chipped away at the plaster, determined to erase any trace of the mark. By the time he finished, a large chunk of the wall was missing, exposing the wooden beams beneath. He stared at the damage, his chest heaving with exertion. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Exhausted, Ryan collapsed onto the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. Sleep felt impossible, but he needed rest if he was going to face whatever came next. Just as he closed his eyes, a noise outside caught his attention. A soft scraping sound, like metal dragging across concrete. His heart skipped a beat. Slowly, Ryan rose from the couch and moved toward the window, peering through the blinds. At first, he saw nothing but the empty street bathed in moonlight. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed movement near the edge of his property. A figure stood beneath the street lamp, its form indistinct in the dim glow. It didn't move like a person. Instead, it swayed slightly, as if caught between solidity and smoke. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to look away, to retreat to the safety of his home, but something compelled him to keep watching. The figure raised an arm, or what passed for an arm, and pointed directly at his house. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it dissolved into the darkness, leaving behind only the faintest trace of a whisper. Ryan stood frozen, his body rigid with fear. He knew then that the Watchers weren't done with him. They had marked him, singled him out for reasons he couldn't comprehend. And there was no escape. The next morning, Ryan arrived at the station early, his face pale and drawn. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the figure beneath the street lamp, its gesture haunting him like a premonition. He couldn't ignore it anymore. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just about Ethan or the woods, it was about him too. He called Lucas and Kim into his office, closing the door behind them. Both officers looked concerned as they took their seats, sensing the gravity of the situation before Ryan even spoke. "I need to tell you something," Ryan began, his voice low and steady. "Last night I found one of the symbols in my house on the wall above my sink." Lucas frowned, leaning forward. "What do you mean, found? Are you saying someone broke in and carved it there?" Ryan shook his head. "No signs of forced entry. Nothing disturbed except the wall itself. And I saw..." He hesitated, unsure how to phrase it. "I saw one of them last night, outside my house, watching me." Kim's eyes widened in alarm. "Are you serious? One of those shadow things?" Ryan nodded grimly. "It pointed at my house, then it disappeared. I don't know what it means, but I think they're targeting me now." Lucas exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "This is insane. You're telling us that these creatures followed you home? Why would they do that?" "I don't know," Ryan admitted. "But I think it's connected to the symbols. Maybe they're tracking me because I went back to the woods, or maybe it's something else entirely." Kim glanced at the photographs on Ryan's desk, her expression troubled. "So what do we do now? If they can show up anywhere, how do we stop them?" Ryan leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. "We fight back. We find out what these symbols mean. If they're tied to the Watchers, there has to be a way to use them against them. Maybe someone out there knows something, someone who's seen this before." Lucas raised an eyebrow skeptically. "You really think someone's dealt with this kind of thing before? These aren't burglars or gang members, Ryan. These are monsters." "They're not invincible," Ryan countered, his voice firm despite the uncertainty gnawing at him. "They're bound by rules. Even if we don't understand them yet, there's always a weakness. We just have to find it." Kim nodded slowly. determination replacing her initial fear. All right, let's start digging. Libraries, archives, local legends, if there's anything out there about these symbols or these creatures, we'll find it. Ryan gave her a grateful smile. Thank you, both of you. I know this isn't easy, but we can't give up. Not when people's lives are at stake. As Lucas and Kim left the office to begin their research, Ryan turned back to the photographs on his desk. He picked up one of the images, studying the intricate design of the glowing symbol. Somewhere within, these markings lay the answers he needed. The days that followed felt like a blur, each one blending into the next as Ryan and his team worked tirelessly to uncover answers. They scoured libraries, pored over old newspapers, and interviewed elderly residents who might have heard stories about the woods or the symbols. It was slow, frustrating work, but they couldn't afford to give up. Every lead, no matter how small, was worth pursuing. Kim found the first real breakthrough in a dusty book at the town's historical society. The book was filled with local legends and folklore, most of which seemed far-fetched or outdated. But buried deep within its pages was a chapter on the Watchers. According to the text, the Watchers were ancient beings said to exist between worlds, neither fully alive nor dead. They were described as silent observers, drawn to places where fear and despair ran rampant. The book mentioned symbols similar to the ones Ryan had photographed, marks left behind by those who sought their power or protection, but warned that invoking the Watchers came at a terrible cost. They're not just random carvings, Kim explained excitedly as she showed Ryan the passage. These symbols are supposed to act as gateways or maybe traps. If someone uses them wrong, the Watchers come. Ryan frowned, flipping through the fragile pages of the book. So you're saying these things aren't just wandering around? Randomly? Someone called them here? It looks that way, Kim replied. But whoever did it either didn't know what they were doing or didn't care about the consequences. Lucas leaned against the desk, his arms crossed. Great. So now we're dealing with some kind of occult stuff on top of everything else. What do we do? Burn sage? Perform an exorcism? Ryan ignored the sarcasm, his mind racing. If the symbols were indeed gateways, then destroying them might sever the connection between the Watchers and this world. But tampering with them could also make things worse. They needed expert advice. Someone who understood the supernatural better than they did. Let me handle this, Ryan said finally. I'll reach out to a professor I know at the university. She specializes in folklore and mythology. If anyone can help us figure this out, it's her. That evening, Ryan sat at his kitchen table staring at his phone as he debated whether to make the call. Professor Helen Meyer wasn't exactly a close friend, more of an acquaintance from a seminar he'd attended years ago, but she was brilliant and open-minded. If anyone would take his story seriously, it was her. Finally, he dialed her number, bracing himself for skepticism. To his relief, Helen listened intently without interrupting, asking thoughtful questions when he finished explaining the situation. These symbols sound familiar, she said after a pause. There's a pattern to them, almost like a language, but decoding it won't be easy. You'll need someone who knows how to read them, and more importantly, someone willing to deal with the risks. Ryan's heart sank. Do you know anyone like that? Helen hesitated. There's a man named Victor Crane. Well, let's just say he operates on the fringes of academia. Rumor has it he dabbles in things most people wouldn't touch. If anyone can translate those symbols, it's him. But be careful, Ryan. People like Victor don't always have your best interests at heart. Ryan thanked her and ended the call, his resolve strengthening. Victor Crane might be dangerous, but he was their only shot at understanding what was happening. With nothing left to lose, Ryan set out to find him. Victor lived in a secluded cabin on the outskirts of town, surrounded by dense woods that seemed eerily similar to the ones where Ethan's family had vanished. Ryan approached cautiously, his hand resting on the grip of his gun as he knocked on the door. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a tall, gaunt man with piercing gray eyes and a wild tangle of hair. "You must be the cop," Victor said, his voice gravelly and low. "Come in." Inside, the cabin was cluttered with books, scrolls, and strange artifacts, crystals, bones, jars filled with unidentifiable substances. Ryan handed Victor the photographs of the symbols, watching closely as the man studied them. "Impressive," Victor murmured, tracing the patterns with his finger. "Whoever carved these knew what they were doing. This isn't amateur work." "Can you read them?" Ryan asked anxiously. Victor nodded slowly. "Yes. But you won't like what they mean." "Try me." Victor sighed, setting the photos down on the table. "These symbols are invitations, rituals designed to summon the Watchers. Whoever made them wanted their attention, and judging by the glowing effect, the ritual worked." Ryan clenched his fists. "Is there any way to undo it, to send them back?" Victor gave him a grim smile. "Not easily. Once the Watchers are summoned, they don't leave until they've taken what they came for. But," he paused, his expression darkening, "there is a way to banish them, a counter-ritual. It involves recreating the symbols in reverse order, while reciting specific incantations. Do it wrong, though, and you'll only anger them." Ryan swallowed hard, the weight of the task settling heavily on his shoulders. "What happens if we succeed?" Victor shrugged. "If you're lucky, the gateway closes and the Watchers return to wherever they came from. If not," he trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. Armed with Victor's instructions, Ryan returned to the clearing in the woods, Lucas and Kim flanking him. The air felt heavier than before, charged with an almost electric tension. The symbols glowed, brighter now, pulsating in rhythm with the whispers that echoed faintly in the distance. "Are you sure about this?" Lucas muttered, glancing nervously at the trees. "No," Ryan admitted. "But we don't have a choice." Using chalk and charcoal, Ryan began redrawing the symbols in reverse order, his hands trembling slightly as he worked. Kim held the flashlight, steady while Lucas kept watch, his gun drawn. The whispers grew louder, overlapping voices speaking in tongues none of them could understand. Shadows danced at the edges of the clearing, shifting unnaturally. When Ryan finished the last symbol, he stepped back, holding the incantation written on a scrap of paper. His voice shook as he began reciting the words, each syllable feeling foreign and heavy on his tongue. The ground beneath them vibrated and the air crackled with energy. For a moment it seemed like nothing was happening. Then, with a deafening roar, the symbols erupted in a blinding flash of green light. The shadows surged forward, twisting and writhing as if caught in a storm. Ryan shielded his face, the heat searing his skin. When the light faded, the clearing was silent. The symbols were gone. The forest stood still, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Whatever force had been drawing the Watchers to this place had vanished. Back at the station, Ryan slumped into his chair, exhaustion overtaking him. They had done it, they had closed the gateway. But the victory felt hollow. Too many questions remained unanswered. Who had summoned the Watchers? Why? And most importantly, what had happened to Ethan's family? As he stared blankly at the wall, Ryan noticed something new, a faint mark etched into the plaster above his desk. It wasn't glowing, but its shape was unmistakable, another symbol. Ryan froze, his blood running cold. The Watchers weren't done. Not yet.